Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Tonight we have a Midlothian Libraries event, which is part of Book Week Scotland. Book Week Scotland, for those of you who don't know, is an annual festival celebrating literature, poetry, writing and creativity throughout the whole of Scotland. And this year, of course, it's a little bit different. Where before we would have events in certain locations across Scotland, this year everything is happening online. However, I think if anyone who has looked at the programme of events that's taking place will agree that it hasn't lost anything from that. There's a really varied and exciting programme of events taking place, free events taking place throughout Scotland this year. And I hope you've joined some of them, and you've obviously joined this one, and we'll join others as they go on throughout the week. So tonight we have an event as part of Book Week Scotland offered through Midlothian Libraries, and it is an open event, a chat with first-time writer Ryan Sturrock. Now, Ryan, I've known Ryan a good few years now. Ryan was originally a library staff member on a temporary basis and is now a permanent member of Midlothian Library staff. He is the smiling, welcoming face of Roslin Library. So before lockdown, Ryan was the person with open arms greeting everyone who walked through the door at Roslin, and when Roslin reopens he will be back in place as the face of the libraries in that community. But Ryan hasn't just I don't know Ryan just as a through his work in libraries. He's done various other things. He's been a DJ for hire, scratching those discs on the turntables. He has a show on Crystal FM, which you may have caught. It's well worth checking out. And he's also been heavily involved in film screenings, independent film screenings at both festival venues and as part of community cinema enterprises. So he's done many varied things, and that's just the ones he's told me about, by the way. There's probably lots more he doesn't want to share. But yeah, so as I say, Ryan's one of our own. I suppose that means Midlothian Libraries can take a share of credit for all his success as he goes forward. I think that is the way it works, Ryan. Can't disagree. And we're delighted that he's here to talk about his experience of producing his first novel. Lots of people think about writing, lots of people think about taking up the pen, but not many of us do. And I think it's very interesting that Ryan has and has actually seen it through from just picking up and starting to write, but it's seen us right through the whole process until actually producing a novel and having the physical thing there for people to read. So it's really great that he's joining us tonight. And what we'll do is I'll pass over to Ryan so he can chat a bit more and he can give us a reading from his novel. There will be a chance to ask questions at the end. If you just type questions in the YouTube dialogue box, Ryan will bring them up at the end of the event. But that's enough of me waffling on. Over to the man of the moment, Ryan Sturrock.
So now it's time for me to waffle. So thanks Stephen for the introduction, and that would now suggest that people are, well, you've sort of sung my praises, so I hope people are going to stay around for the next little while. And like I said, we're going to be talking about my new book, Death's Whisper. It's a happy little horror novel about the plague. So it's quite topical. So I think what we'll do to start with, I'm just going to open the book and read the prologue, which is right at the very start of the book, and then I'll hand you over to Stephen, who'll then move the discussion forward and get me away from reading the book. So this is how the book starts. This once bustling city street is now deserted, devoid of any life or movement. On both sides of this dark and dreary cobble street, ancient tall buildings block out the little light that penetrates through the thunderous clouds forming in the sky. Until recently, the ground level of these buildings housed an abundance of thriving shops, bars and restaurants, all of which have been abandoned. Inside, behind the gloomy windows, sit the furniture, items for sale, and food and drink that will never be eaten. It is as if everything has come to a sudden stop, like the people just got up and left one day to move on to some other place in a desperate rush, and no time to pack their belongings. The Royal Mile sits just as it did in humanity's glory days, as if the people might return at any moment to resume life in Edinburgh's city centre. The people didn't leave though, not physically at least. Above the shops, bars and restaurants, they lie in their deathbeds, dead, rotting, festering, and disintegrating away to nothing. Their skin has assumed the appearance of old logs and charcoal and the remains of a recently extinguished fire. Large grey flecks of dead flesh crumble and fall away from the bodies like ash. And that's where we lose all our viewers. Where were we? Oh yes. Not only are the dead decomposing in their dwellings, they also line the silent street below. They lie strewn around with horrified, painful expressions of exasperation painted onto their decomposing faces. It's cheery. These are the people who tried to escape, who tried to outrun the plague in the final days of humanity. In the end, there was nowhere they could outrun the inevitable onslaught of the plague as it spread throughout the world, leaving a trail of death, corpses, and destruction in its wake. The flaking ash effortlessly peels away from the dead bodies in the light breeze and weightlessly floats upwards in the air, where it swirls and lingers before softly spraying back down to earth in the same lifeless, weightless way that it floated up. It lands on everything in its path: street lamps, doorways, abandoned cars, and eventually reaching the street cobbles. The entire street is covered in a light dusting of ash. In the far distance, approaching footsteps fall on unhearing ears. A dark silhouette emerges through the haze of ash. The figure's long, heavy black jacket, scuffed and cracked leather, sweeps behind the figure as he makes his way along the street, revealing old, worn-out black boots and black cloak. His face does not resemble that of a human face, but rather something between a human and some grotesque black bird. Two big round glassy eyes peer over a huge bulging beak of black bone-like texture. The tired ancient face is covered with scrapes and cracks all over, as if it has been savagely beaten in some fierce battles over the many years of its existence. Parts of the skin and beak are so severely damaged that achingly painful flesh wounds expose the red raw flesh to the bitter elements. The only living thing in this bleak landscape clings tightly onto an old wooden walking stick for support. The ancient figure staggers and limps its way slowly and carefully between the dead bodies, picking a path along the street, pushing its dying body to the limits in its determination to reach its destination. The figure shows no interest in the dead bodies littered along the street. The purpose of his visit sits further along the mile. High above the cobbled pavement, situated on the top floor of one of the tenement buildings, sits a humble balcony. The balcony is the only source of limited fading colour in this otherwise bleak landscape. Decaying flowers and planters along the sides of the small square space display their fading colours, a blend of reds, blues, yellows, orange and whites, all of which will soon be as dead as the rest of this street. A dark doorway leads through the exposed brickwork to the wall and into the apartment. Sitting in a chair by the metal railings, an elderly man watches over the scene below. His tired, haggard eyes have witnessed horrors no man should ever be exposed to. From below, he hears approaching footsteps. He struggles to see through the falling ash and squints his eyes to get a better view of the approaching guest. Even from this height, he can make out the distinct shape of the hat, beak, and a long sweeping jacket emerging from the grim, gritty fog like a ghostly apparition. As it approaches, the figure's large, glassy eyes lock onto the old man. You can almost feel aching sorrow seeping out of those watering eyes that silently weep. His beak begins to quiver, allowing a haunting, warbling sound, like that of grinding, untuned violin strings, the howl of an untamed wild beast, and a person's crying blended together. The petrifying sound has an unusually melodic structure to it, as if the figure is singing some unsettling, sorrowful tune. This is a familiar sound to the old man, who has heard it so many times before, both in life and echoing through his deepest, darkest nightmares. Always the same horrendous grinding racket that somehow manages to convey all the pain and suffering of the world, enough to make even the hardiest person's heart pine and weep. It is as if all the sorrow, death, and grief of humanity is escaping from that grotesque beak. The old man has anticipated this moment for what feels like an eternity. His heart plummets to his feet as he comes to terms with what the appearance of his visitor signifies. The end has come. This is where it ends. He too begins to cry, but these are not tears of fear. The paramount fear that had once tormented his thoughts has long since subsided into grief. A sadness so great it feels as if he grieves for the entire human race in the final moment of his life. The uninvited visitor begins to make his way up the tired metal staircase which leads to the rooftop garden. With every step, the dreadful, wounded crying melody grows louder and closer to the old man. There you go. That's something nice and cheery for a Tuesday evening. And so that's how the book starts. And then it then goes back in time, and then during the course of the book, then builds up to that moment, which comes back later on. So that's me.
Well, thanks for that, Ryan. Thanks for that. That was really good. A really kind of very detailed look at a kind of post-apocalyptic world. When you started talking about the deserted streets and like the cafes all being empty, I thought tier 4, but then it meant much darker even than that. And yeah, I thought we're in a different realm altogether here. So what I thought I'd do is I'll start off by asking you a few questions, if that's okay, Ryan. And the first one I thought I would pitch your way is, what attracted you to the horror genre? Or if you like, what is it that you like about horror as a genre?
Well, I've always sort of enjoyed, I don't know exactly what sort of pulled me into horror to start with, but I've always been a horror fan for as long as I can remember. And bizarrely, it started quite a few years ago when I was in high school. To be honest, I was probably too young to be watching it, but I watched The Shining, the film by Stanley Kubrick, and to that point, I had sort of stopped reading for a few years when I went to high school. I just sort of, for whatever reason, sort of got out of the habit of reading. And then I watched the film, The Shining, when I was probably too young to watch it, but cracking film. I thought, oh, that's really good. So I thought, I'm going to read the book now. And I went and read the book by Stephen King. That's my all-time favourite novel. And from there, I've just always sort of been into horror from there. So most of the most of the books that I read myself tend to be things along the same sort of lines as Stephen King. So I read a lot of horror stuff myself. So that was just a natural sort of thing to go on to write, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, completely get it. And do you prefer, if you're talking about your films, do you prefer the kind of gore stuff, or do you prefer the more kind of suspense, scary stuff?
Well, being honest, I'm not really a huge fan of the gory sort of horror. And with one exception of The Shining, I'm not really a fan of the whole haunted house type horror where, oh, we're in a haunted house, oh, it's always in the dark, oh, conveniently there's no phone reception, oh, scary. I mean that just doesn't really do anything for me personally. Although recently on Netflix, I ended up watching The Haunting of Hill House and The
Yeah,
Haunting of Bly Manor, and
yeah,
they're both that sort of thing, sort of stuck in a haunted house, but it's done in a very artistic way. It's not your usual sort of thing where it's so haunted house, no phone signal, just a real corny sort of horror thing. So I like things that have a good story to them and a good sort of backdrop to them, and something that's intriguing and sort of pulls you in. And I think that's what I liked about both of those series on Netflix, is the fact that they were like it sort of pulled you in, and you had, and for me anyway, it sort of made you want to watch more and more and more, just to find out what was going on and and what it was building up to. So those sort of stories, that's the sort of horror that I like, sort of intriguing stuff.
yeah. So we know what you like now, and what you probably possibly brought to your writing. So I suppose at this point, the correct question to ask is, what made you decide to write a novel?
Well, what what it was, I'm a well, my imagination's always reeling away with some idea or another, and I seem to have a very active imagination where although where although you'll think that I'm there in person, I'm physically there with you, but in my head I'm often some daydream inventing some fantasy world. So so quite often.
No,
Sorry.
it all becomes clear now, Ryan.
Oh yeah,
Those faraway looks in your eye when I'm talking to you.
it all makes sense at work now, doesn't it?
Sorry, go on.
Um,
Oh, it really does.
so I'm always inventing these
Go
ideas
on. Sorry.
and these stories and sort of ideas in my head, but but up until a couple of years ago, I had absolutely no intention of writing a book, um, because when I finished school, I studied in film production. So that's always been the sort of line of work that I enjoy doing, is film production and everything that involves TV, film, you name it. And when I first dreamt up this idea, I saw it working as a horror film. But then the more the more that I began to develop the idea in my mind, the more I realized very quickly that the sort of, well, for reasons that will become apparent to anyone that reads the book, it would require quite a substantial budget to actually produce it, and it's a budget that, quite frankly, that I just don't have to throw at such a project. But I'd sort of become attached to this cheery little story that I had invented, so I thought, well, I don't want to just leave it to disappear. And I thought, well, I like reading, I like horror, why don't I just sort of take that story that I had sort of invented and develop it, as opposed to being for a film, putting it into a book format, because I thought, well, it's cheaper to produce a book than it is to produce a film. So I thought, nothing to lose. So that's basically a rather waffled explanation of how I became, or how I got on to writing this.
Okay, that's really interesting. What about the whole process of writing? Do you find it hard to motivate yourself to write? Because I mean, writing a novel is quite a long process. It takes a long time from when you first start to when you think that's a finished product and that you're happy with to put out there and let others read. Do you find you had to be quite disciplined about it? Did you have to actually have a schedule, or was it more you did it when you felt the creative juices flowing, if you like? How did you approach the whole thing about writing?
Well, see at home. I mean, I must admit that at home, I'm quite easily distracted, because at home I've got, the internet, or I'll just watch a film, or there's something on the TV, or I'll just read a book. So I'm quite easily distracted at home. But what I found is that when I'm on holiday, that's when my mind becomes even more active and even more imaginative than it normally is. So for me, it made logical sense to do the writing while I was on holiday. I mean, most people go on holiday to swim in the sea, or go out for meals and go for walks, or whatever. Whereas I went on holiday to do a bit of that and to sit in the sun and do some writing. So I found that when I was away on holiday, that was me in my happy zone, if you like, and that's where I was quite happily sitting, writing away a little bit at a time, sitting looking out at the sea, looking out at the sun, and I was quite happy doing that. And then when I got back home, the ideas were still in my head, but I sort of struggled to make the time, if you like, to focus on doing the writing. So the actual book took me about 2.5 years to actually write from start to finish. And that's because at home, I just wasn't really doing much on it. So it was only really when I was on holiday that I was really putting the time in to doing the writing. But then earlier on this year, when everything kicked off with this whole coronavirus thing, I thought, well, hold on, I've got this book that's about 3/4 finished, and I thought, well, that sort of gave me the push to actually finish the thing off, because I suddenly found that although I was still working with the library service, I suddenly found that I was no longer doing a lot of my social things, like going to the cinema or meeting friends or doing whatever. So I suddenly found that I was going to work, coming home, and I was getting fed up watching things on the TV, and I was in a bit of a lull where I wasn't really finding any books that sort of gripped me at the time. So I thought, well, I'm going to use the time to try and be constructive and to finish the book off. So sort of forced myself into doing it, and I'm happy I did.
Yeah, I am. Well, it's a happy coincidence, I suppose. The book that you were 3/4 of the way to completing, as you said, Ryan, was had struck such a chord, I suppose, with current events that are taking place in the world at the moment. Did you said that it was 3/4 finished, so you still had a quarter of the book to do, and then of course there's going back and rewriting bits and editing and rereading, etc. Did what was going on in the world at that time, did that influence how you finished up, or how you edited the book, or did you always have the ending fixed in your mind?
Well, I always knew how the book was going to finish, because that little bit that I read earlier on, that's, although it's the start of the book, it sort of returns to that scene almost at the very end. There's a couple of more chapters after that at the end, but I always knew that was what it was building up to, and so that was so I always knew where the story was going, and I always knew that it was set in Edinburgh. It was going to kick off in the 1600s, and then it was going to bring the story up to date to today. But I was quite careful in the book not to say what year the modern settings in the book are, because I wanted it to, because I thought if I was to say 2020, that would then sort of date the book, whereas I thought I don't really specify when the modern scenes are taking place. That means that in theory it could be read in 5-10 years to come, and you could still see it being a possibility, as opposed to saying, oh, 2020 was 10 years ago, if you get my drift. But interestingly, although I knew where the story was going to end, how it began actually changed a little bit as I began writing it, because, well, I tried to write the story in a logical order. So I started at the beginning, and I tried to write it sort of going beginning, middle, end. But by the time I got to the end, a few of the chapters that I had written early on were no longer relevant, and they didn't quite gel. So I ended up going back and rewriting probably the first sort of 3 or 4 chapters. I rewrote completely. So the beginning of the book is pretty different to how I had originally saw it kicking off.
Right. Okay. I suppose that's kind of that's interesting, because a lot of novels go through that kind of process, don't they? Where they alter and they change, and sometimes the final product that you end up with can be very, very different to what you originally envisaged. Yours didn't change that much, but there certainly does seem to have been a certain amount of transformation, if you like, with the novel as you went along. Do you find it's just occurred to me, did you find it easy basing, well, first of all, I suppose, why did you base it in Edinburgh? And secondly, do you find it quite easy? Did you find it easy that you were basing it in a place where your readers would know all the locations? Or do you think sometimes it's easier to write a book where you're in a more fictional location, so you don't have to be accurate?
Well, I think that, well, for me, I had based it in Edinburgh because, well, basically, it's the whole story sort of stemmed from the idea that in Edinburgh during the 1600s, when you had the Black Death plague that was doing the rounds, there was these streets, these underground streets in Edinburgh that you can still go and visit at various tourist attractions, which I won't mention because I haven't sponsored me to promote them. But if you can probably guess what I'm talking about. And you can actually go underground and see these streets. And what they did during the 1600s is they actually put plague victims into these closes, and they were sort of left there to get better, but most of them never got better. Most of them passed away when they were down there. But there's a rumor and a legend that says that a lot of the plague victims were actually locked away underground, and they sort of bricked over the entrance and left them all down there to die, which never actually happened. That was the sort of inspiration for the original setting of the book. So because that part of it is loosely, very loosely historically accurate, I decided, well, I'm going to set the whole thing in Edinburgh. And plus, it does help, well, it certainly helped me anyway, knowing Edinburgh personally, so that I could picture it in my mind how the different scenes look, and how I was going to portray that in the book. So yeah, so for me, it does help knowing the location in real life.
Yeah, well, I suppose like you were saying, the historical background kind of centred where you were going to be, where your novel was going to be based, given it is the history of the Edinburgh Plague that's vital to the part of the story. I wonder, what advice would you have to people who have a story in their head and are starting out and thinking of going down the kind of the publishing route that you went down? Have you got any advice and tips you could give to people?
Well, the only thing I would say would be to just go for it, because I mean, I'm not an expert by any means of the imagination, but I think that, well, it's an old cliche, but I do think that everyone has a story in them. And I think it's a shame that so many people have these wonderful ideas in their head, but they never see the light of day. And I think that even if you think, oh well, no one's going to want to read it, I think there's always going to be an audience for any kind of story, because I realise that I'm writing horror, and I know that horror isn't really everyone's sort of thing, but I think that every story has a place. So I think the hardest part is actually starting it. But once you've started it, well, for me anyway, I found that it all just began falling into place. And yeah, so I would say just go for it and sort of let the whole thing reel off. One thing I would say that I found very useful actually was once I had the first draft of the book finished, I had actually gave it to my dad to have a look through, and quite handily, I had in my head, I had killed off this one character, but I forgot to mention that in the book. So my dad said, "Oh well, this character, is that supposed to be them that died?" I was like, "Oh yeah, did I not mention that?" So I would say it is helpful to get someone to sort of give it a quick look through, and anything that isn't quite adding up, that then gives you the chance to rectify that before it goes out to the public.
Okay, how did you find the whole kind of self-publishing thing? How did you find that experience?
Well, I quite enjoyed it because, well, being honest, I'm a bit of a control freak. So when it came to,
all coming out about you tonight, Ryan. It's all coming out.
So when it came to the book, I had a very clear idea of how I wanted it to look, and how I wanted it to be presented and everything. So the benefit of doing self-publishing is the fact that I got to decide on everything myself, whereas the benefit, I suppose, of having a publisher is that they take a lot of the stress and a lot of the sort of problems away from you. Because I did find that although the printer company that I ended up using for getting the books printed, they were good and professional and knew what they were doing, but the files had to be in a certain format, and that was a struggle for me, because although I've done a lot of photography work and I've sent things off to printers before, but I've never actually sent a book off to print. So that was a whole experience in itself. And because I was really struggling to get this to get the text and the front cover and everything in a certain format, one of my friends from the radio had sort of converted it into the file that we needed to then send back to the publisher, but that gave me a real headache. So that gave me a lot of stress for about a week and a half. But whereas to anyone that knows what they're doing, they could just do it like that and it's done. So I would say that was a learning curve for me, doing the self-publishing. And I suppose the other thing with self-publishing is you're responsible for doing all of the marketing, all of the publicity, all of the selling the books. So every time I sell a book, I've then got to package it up, off to the post office, send it away, and so you've got all that. But I quite enjoy doing that, because it's sort of my product, and I just love the whole buzz of sort of sending them out. And plus, when the books were first printed and delivered to the house, I thought, oh, yes, so it was quite exciting seeing those, seeing it in print for the very first time. But I can see the benefit of going down the traditional publishing route, because they would take away all the stress and all the worry. You hand over your manuscript, and the next thing you know, you've got a book. So there's benefits both ways.
Right, okay, but it's certainly something that it certainly seems to have been a positive experience for you. So I think it's certainly something that you would recommend other people do if they feel they have a product, they have a piece of writing that they want to reach a wider audience. While you're talking about the whole physical production there, Ryan, I was just going to ask you about the cover of your novel. It's very striking. How did that come about?
Well, if I hold it up to you, I'm going to take my post-it note out of this one, because post-it note doesn't look good. But I don't know if you can see that very well on the screen. That's the cover, although it might be showing up in reverse for some reason. But that's the cover of the book. And on there, originally I was originally going to do a bit of painting or a bit of drawing, and because I wanted a picture of the plague doctor on there, who's basically there's two plague doctors who are the main characters in the book, and so I wanted a picture of a plague doctor on there. But the first problem is that well, I like my photography, but I'm useless at drawing, I'm useless at painting, anything like that where I have to do the work myself, I'm useless. So I thought, here's an idea. So I ended up getting a mask, plague doctor mask. I mean that's not an original. That's a sort of, and that's not even a sort of true representation. It's more of an artistic sort of artistic version of a plague doctor mask with a big beak. And this one's got hands on it. So what I did is I photographed the mask, and then I added the background to it, and I made it look like smoke is coming out of the mask, and that's a reference to one of the scenes that takes place about towards the end of the book. It's it's a reference to one of the scenes later on the book, which I won't ruin for anyone that hasn't read it. But so that's what I did, and to me, when I'm doing photography stuff, quite a lot of the photography work work, I say, like landscape sort of stuff that I do. That quite a lot of my photos focus on color, so I wanted to get that across on the cover of the book. So although it's quite a dark cover, it's very saturated blacks and quite a bright, vibrant, it's like gold and red on there as well. So that's where the cover was born.
Well, it's very striking. Did you get the mask from Toys R Us?
Not Toys R Us.
No.
I got it from an independent from an independent seller online, because see that's the benefit of the internet. You can go onto any of these independent seller websites, like Not on the High Street or Etsy or one of these. You can basically type anything in, and guaranteed someone out there is making something that you're looking for. So it's great. I mean, I just typed in a plague doctor mask and I came up with hundreds of results. I thought, oh, I like the look of that one. So it's good.
Yeah, it's the advantages of technology. If you're looking for a plague doctor mask, you've got hundreds of choices. I wonder, Ryan, has any questions come in over the YouTube stream?
I'm just going to have a look. There has been people commenting, but I'm not entirely sure what they're saying. Give me a second.
Well, while you're checking that, can I ask a question?
You can.
Has your appetite been whetted by your first novel, or do you think you have the strength and the fortitude to tackle another?
Oh, definitely. And I've already got about 5 ideas floating around in my head, but I've sort of been focusing on one of them that I think is going to be the next book. So same again, it's certainly going to be set in Scotland. I'm not entirely certain if it'll be Edinburgh. I think a part of this next one will be Edinburgh. And again, it's going to be another horror type book, but I don't think it's going to be as bleak as this one, because this one I've written is, I mean, I make no bones about it, it is quite a bleak, dark story. And I think this next one that I'm planning will, it's still going to be horror, but not as horrific as this one. And yeah, so at the moment, I'm just sort of finalizing the sort of storyline in my head, because I've got all the different segments of it, but at the moment I'm trying to piece it all together. And there's a couple of characters in this new story that I'm inventing that I can't quite figure out what happens to them, or how they feed into the bigger picture. So at the moment I'm trying to figure all that out first, and I'm hoping to begin writing it in January if I've got all the sort of pieces in place, and then hopefully in January I'll begin writing it properly. So it's certainly got me going for more books. Right, let's see. Someone's saying can't wait to read it. Let's see. So atmospheric. Well, it's certainly grim. I'll give you that. And also agreeing the Haunting Hill House is good.
Ryan, haunted house stories or films. If you ever get a chance, have you ever seen a Spanish horror film called The Orphanage?
Yes, very good film.
Excellent,
Very good film.
Excellent film. It's a haunted house, but it's It's excellent, very atmospheric, and it's got a story to tell as well, like you're saying.
Let's see. I think I'm going to need to report my dad for online abuse. He's saying that sometimes he knows that he's talking to me and I'm not listening. That's online abuse. I'm going to report him for that. Let's see. What else?
He's known that for a long time, Ryan. A very, very long time.
Ian Stewart, he's saying, "Shut your blinds, Ryan. Someone's looking in." Okay.
That's quite creepy, actually. That could be the basis for a novel.
It could be. Why so many chapters? That's a good point. For anyone that goes on to read the book, there is quite a lot of chapters. Let me just double check how many there are. Right, let's see. There are 6 to 8 chapters plus the prologue right at the beginning, so technically 69 chapters. The chapters in the book are quite short. They're not big chapters, and the reason I did that is because although Stephen King is probably my favorite author, quite a lot of his books are like door stoppers, and I think that sometimes, as good as a book is, it can sometimes go on just a little bit too long. So what I tried to do with chapters in this book is I tried to keep them short and concise and to the point, but while telling the story just as I felt right. So I think well, personally, I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's quite a fast-paced sort of book. My intention was you finish one short chapter, I'll just read another one and another bit and another bit, because I didn't want to just drag on and on and on and to drag it out needlessly. So that's why there's so many chapters. Let's see any plans in future for a book away from horror. One of the ideas that I do have is something that wouldn't necessarily be horror, but maybe more a psychological thriller. I've got a couple of ideas for something along that sort of line. So I could potentially go down the route of doing things that aren't horror, but horror is really what I know best and what I sort of read most of and what I enjoy. So I think for the time being, I'm going to stick with horror, but I do have one or two ideas for things that are slightly different from horror. So you never know where I might go next.
I think quite a lot of horror writers do that, don't they? A lot of Andrew Clavin and Peter Straub, they're known as horror writers, but they've written several novels where I suppose if the main thing is your suspense, like you were talking about, Ryan, if it's the suspense element that's strong in your horror, then it doesn't take much to take those elements out and you're ending up with a book that's more a suspense thriller rather than a straight horror novel, depending on the setting.
Yeah. Let's see, another question. What about a travel book on Corfu? Basically, when I'm not when I'm not in Scotland, I'm in Corfu. Basically, just can't get away from the place, and that's actually where most of this book was written in Corfu. What about a travel book on Corfu? No, because I don't know enough about I know about the place I go to, but I don't think I want to get down the road of doing travel books, not at the moment anyway. Juliet is asking, Ryan, do you not get scared? I don't actually get, well, not so much, because I think because I've been reading horror and watching horror for such a long time, I think I've uh, sort of grown accustomed to it. So I've sort of hardened up to a lot of horror stuff now. So it has to be something that's really, really frightening and different for it to sort of get to me. I mean, and I know this is going to sound weird actually, but quite often it's not sort of made up things like say what I've written or Stephen King books or things that it's normally real life things that frighten me, like um like the prospect of somewhere out there's a button that could blow up the planet. I mean things like that frighten me, and sometimes I'll go to bed after watching the news, and there maybe be a bit on the news that sort of gets lodged in my head, and then because I've got an overactive imagination, I'll be lying in bed mulling over whatever it is I've just seen on the news, and next thing you know, I've invented this terrifying situation. Like, and one of them recently was I was watching. Well, it was a Saturday night. There was nothing on TV. Flicking through, and there was a program on, this horrendous program, where there was these conspiracy theorists were saying that they were going to track down Hitler because they thought Hitler was still alive, and the program was complete and utter nonsense. But when I was in bed, so it lodged in my head, and I thought, oh, just where would he be? And I mean, stuff like that scares me, but fictional horror doesn't usually frighten me. Let's see. Sandra is asking, did you do a lot of research about the plague for the book? Not a massive amount, to be honest, because I knew little bits about it, but I didn't know a huge amount about the plague. It was just the whole idea that sort of lodged in my head. But when I was about halfway through writing it, I mean, I probably should have done it before I started writing, but when I was about halfway through writing, I thought, I should probably go back and sort of backtrack and do a little bit of research so I can make the historical element of the book a little bit more factual, so then it makes it a bit more realistic. So I ended up going back and doing a little bit of research, and then I thought, oh, the bits that I've written are pretty unrealistic. So then I had to go and adapt the early parts of the book. So the only character in the book who is a real character is one of the plague doctors called George Ray, and he was a real life plague doctor in Edinburgh at the time that the beginning of this book is set. But he's only a minor character in this book, because I didn't want to make it about a real person. So I sort of took the idea of the plague doctor, the image of the plague doctor, and I put it into the book. And George Ray, who, like I said, was a real plague doctor for Edinburgh in the 1600s, he's regarded as quite a forward-thinking man for his time, because he helped to eradicate plague from Edinburgh, and he was quite ahead of his time back in 1600s. But in the book, he's made to look a bit of in the book I've sort of turned him into a bit of an idiot, but that's not an attack on the real person. I sort of just used his name as a sort of tribute to the real guy, and made him into a bit of an oath, because I thought I wanted to build up a better picture of Ian Campbell, who's the main character in this book, and he's the main sort of plague doctor in this fictional version. And some of the methods that they use for treating the plague in the 1600s appear in the first couple of chapters of this book. Like, they believed that when a person had the plague, they had like big boils on their body. They thought, oh, well, if I put leeches onto them, they'll suck out the poison and that'll cure the person of the plague. So that treatment appears in it. And also something that was really strange was they had this wacky idea that if they took a live chicken and plucked the chicken so it was no feathers on it, just this naked chicken, and rubbed it up and down the body of the plague victim, the chicken would catch a plague and the person would be cured, which by 1600s terms, that was quite a radical idea. But now you would run in horror if the doctor said, oh, I'm just going to pluck this chicken and rub it up and down you. So that features, well, it's sort of briefly mentioned in the book by the other plague doctors who are sort of ridiculing this whole idea. Let's see.
Ryan, we're close to the end of our time. I'll just say that I think the chicken cure sounds like something that Donald Trump would have recommended in the last couple of months. Is there any questions left that have come in from people viewing?
Not so much, although Wendy is saying a solo night shift in Roslyn, that would be scary. It's not that bad.
Roslyn's not that bad. The Roslyn locals are very friendly. They're very friendly. No horror there at all. Okay, so our time's almost up. So if people want to read the book, if they haven't already, and they should, they can borrow it from Midlothian libraries. Or where else can they track it down, Ryan, if they want their very own copy to pass on to their friends?
Well, if you want your very own copy, there's a couple of different places. You can get it from my own website, which is www.ryansturrock.com. So you can get it on there as a paperback, ryansturrock.com, all one word. You can also get it on Amazon, but the only problem with Amazon is they will charge extra for delivery. It's also available as an ebook on Kindle, Kobo, and Google Books. But of course, if for whatever reason you're not a member of the library, get yourself signed up, and you can borrow your copy from Midlothian Library Service.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us this evening. It's been a really good hour. It's just flown past. Thanks, Ryan, for the chat and for introducing us to your book and telling us how it all came about. And as I say, if people haven't read it already, I think appetites will be whetted to track the book down and read it.
Thanks for having me.
So thanks, Ryan, for joining us tonight. Thanks all of you. No, thank you. And thanks all of you for joining us tonight as well. This is Tuesday, only the second day of Book Week Scotland. There are other events going on throughout Scotland, including if you've enjoyed tonight and fancy another Midlothian-based author event, we've got one on Thursday night with Rebecca McKinney. I've heard Rebecca speak before, and she's really good value as well. So I would recommend that you join us for that one as well. But as I say, thanks everyone for coming along. Thank you, Ryan, for a really great event, really interesting event. And have a good evening and happy Book Week Scotland, everyone.
Thank you.